My brother-in-law unplugged the server that kept my father's company alive while half the office watched me stand there like garbage waiting to be taken out. He did it with a smile. Not a nervous smile. Not the kind people give when they are doing something difficult and hope everyone understands. Richard Hale smiled like he had been waiting months for that exact moment, like the black cable in his hand was not a lifeline to 40 years of family work, but a trophy he had finally earned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, loud enough for accounting, dispatch, sales, and the 2 warehouse interns to hear from the hallway, "this is what outdated thinking looks like." I stood beside the server room door in my gray hoodie, jeans, and scuffed sneakers, hands buried in my pockets because I did not trust them not to shake. The room behind me was cold, humming, and narrow, lined with racks I had built, patched, protected, and slept beside more nights than anyone in that building knew. Green lights blinked in steady rows like small, stubborn hearts. Richard lifted the main network cable. A few people laughed because they thought they were supposed to. My sister Sophia stood at the edge of the crowd in a cream blazer, her arms crossed tight across her chest. She looked embarrassed, but not for him. For me. That hurt worse than the laughter. My father was not there. That was the part that burned. Arturo Mendoza, the man who started Mendoza Freight and Customs with 3 used trucks, a borrowed warehouse, and a spiral notebook full of delivery routes, had let his brand new son-in-law turn the digital heart of his company into a public execution. Richard had married Sophia 6 months earlier. Before that, he had arrived in our family like a commercial for a life none of us had ordered: tailored suits, perfect teeth, expensive watch, a voice that made simple things sound like $1 million strategy. He said words like synergy, scalability, and legacy transformation with the same confidence my dad used to say fuel cost, driver safety, and customer trust. My father mistook confidence for competence. That mistake almost destroyed us. I had been working for Mendoza Freight since I was 19. Officially, my title was Systems Operations Manager, which meant nothing to anyone outside my office. Unofficially, I was the reason our orders did not collapse every December, why customs forms did not get rejected, why clients in Texas, California, Illinois, and New Jersey could ship machinery, medical supplies, food products, and retail inventory without waking up to missing payments or duplicate charges. I had written the validation engine myself. It was not pretty. It was not fashionable. It was not something a consultant would put in a glossy slide deck. But it knew our business better than any outside platform did. It knew which clients needed customs paperwork attached before payment capture. It knew which shipments had to be split by tax jurisdiction. It knew which routes could not be assigned to certain carriers after weather alerts. It knew insurance exceptions, old contract terms, warehouse cutoffs, port delays, driver limits, and hundreds of weird little rules that only existed because real companies are not built in clean boxes. Nobody saw any of that. They saw my sister in a blazer walking beside my father into board meetings. They saw Richard shaking hands with bankers and calling himself a growth strategist. They saw me eating cold noodles at my desk at midnight, my hair twisted into a messy knot, my hoodie sleeves pulled over my palms while green code reflected in my glasses. To them, I was useful but not impressive. Richard understood that weakness in my family immediately. The first time he called me an amateur, it was at Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Sugar Land. My mother had made pot roast because Richard once said it reminded him of real American family dinners, even though our family had been American since before he was born and nobody needed his approval on what counted. We were halfway through eating when my father mentioned that we were preparing for the Black Friday shipping surge. Richard leaned back, swirled ice in his bourbon, and said, with respect, "Izzy, your system works, but working is not the same as scaling. My name is Isabella, but only people who love me call me Izzy." Richard used it like he had stolen something from my childhood and was showing me he could break it. I put down my fork. "It scales fine when people follow the process." "That is exactly the problem," he said. "A $100 million company should not depend on processes that live in one person's head. They do not live in my head. They live in documented code, audit logs, and redundant backups." He smiled at Sophia, then at my father. "See? This is what I mean. She talks about code like it is a family heirloom." My mother looked down at her plate. My father gave me the small warning look he had used since I was a teenager. "Be polite. Do not make a scene. Let the man talk." I did not listen. "If you replace that system without replicating the logic, orders will fail." Richard laughed softly. "That is fear talking." "No," I said. "That is experience." He turned to my father. "Arturo, I am not trying to offend anyone. But you built a serious company. It is time to stop letting a hobby project run the backbone." A hobby project. 10 years of my life became a hobby project between mashed potatoes and dessert. My father did not defend me. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and said, "Maybe it is time we look at modern options." Sophia touched Richard's arm under the table like he had just said something brave. I remember the sound of my fork scraping the plate when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. I did not cry. I wanted to, but tears felt too generous. Tears would have meant they had reached a soft place. What I felt was colder than that. It was the beginning of a math problem. 2 weeks later, Richard presented his New Era initiative in the conference room. He had slides. Men like Richard always have slides. On the screen behind him were pictures of clouds, highways, smiling warehouse workers who did not work for us, and a slogan had probably paid someone too much to write: faster freight, smarter future. His plan was simple enough to sound brilliant to people who did not understand the risk. Migrate everything to a cheap logistics cloud vendor called SkyRoute One. Retire the old server infrastructure. Reduce headcount and warehouse operations. Centralize routing. Automate billing, impress investors. Look modern. He called Javier Ramirez redundant. Javier had been our warehouse operations manager for 17 years. He knew every dock door, every forklift scar in the concrete, every driver's temper, every carrier that lied about pickup windows, every customer who smiled while trying to dodge detention fees. He had carried my father through storms, strikes, and a warehouse fire in 2014. Richard called him redundant. I raised my hand. Richard glanced at me like a teacher deciding whether to let the difficult child speak. "Yes, Isabella? You cannot migrate by Friday." A few people shifted. Richard kept smiling. "The vendor has assured us implementation is straightforward." "Did they review the validation engine?" "They reviewed operational requirements." "That is not what I asked." My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes tired. He had been softer lately, easier to flatter, quicker to wave off details. I looked directly at him. "Dad, this is not just storage. It is not just a database. Every order runs through layered checks before billing, routing, customs release, insurance assignment, and carrier confirmation. If you shut it down without a proper mirror, we could duplicate charges, freeze payments, reject legitimate orders, and trigger customs holds." Richard clapped once, softly. "And that is exactly the kind of bottleneck thinking we are moving away from. It is not bottleneck thinking. It is architecture. Architecture should not require one person guarding a closet full of cables." I felt heat climb up my neck. "That closet has saved this company more times than your slides have." The room went quiet. My father said my name in that low voice again. "Isabella." Richard spread his hands, performing patience. "No one is attacking you. We are just asking you to learn to work with a team." I almost laughed. A team? I had been begging for a team for 6 years. "Instead," I said, "then give me 90 days. Let me run a parallel build. Let me test failure cases." Richard shook his head. "Fear always asks for more time." My father stared at the slide deck, then at Richard, then at me. For 1 second, I thought he would remember every Thanksgiving I missed because our systems went down, every storm night I spent at the office, every time I fixed something before he even knew it had broken. He did not. "Give it a chance," he said quietly, then repeated it in a softer voice for the room. "Give it a chance, sweetheart." Sweetheart. That was what men called women right before ignoring them. By Friday morning, Richard had arranged a little ceremony around my humiliation. He said it was a transition event. He invited department leads, 2 consultants from SkyRoute One, and even a junior marketing employee to record short clips for internal morale. He had coffee brought in. He wore a navy suit and no tie, sleeves rolled up as if he were about to do physical labor instead of destroy mine. I arrived early, hoping to at least supervise the shutdown safely. Security had already changed my access card. That was how I learned Richard had locked me out. The guard at the front desk would not meet my eyes when the scanner flashed red. "Mr. Hale said all legacy system access is suspended until after migration," he said. "Mr. Hale does not know how to shut it down safely." "I am sorry, Ms. Mendoza." He was sorry. Everyone was always sorry while doing exactly what Richard wanted. Javier found me in the lobby. He was holding a cardboard box with his name printed on the side in black marker. "You too?" I asked. He gave me a bitter smile. "Apparently I am part of the past." Inside his box were 17 years of warehouse notes, a framed photo from the company picnic, 2 safety awards, and a tiny ceramic bulldog his granddaughter had painted for his desk. I looked at that bulldog and something inside me cracked. "Javi, I tried." "I know you did, kid. I should have done more." He shook his head. "No. You told them the bridge was out. They drove faster." Richard came through the glass doors then, followed by his little parade. "Isabella," he said, too brightly. "Glad you made it." I was worried you would take this personally. This is personal. No, he said, leaning close enough that only I could hear. This is business, try to learn the difference. Then he raised his voice for everyone. Today, Mendoza Freight steps into the future. The consultants nodded. The interns held their phones low, pretending not to record. Sophia stood beside my father's assistant, twisting her wedding ring. My father was on a call in Dallas, allegedly too busy to attend. That was the story, anyway. I think the truth was worse. I think he knew this would hurt me and chose not to witness it. Richard opened the server room door with a badge that should never have been given to him. Cold air spilled into the hallway. He walked to the main rack. I followed but stopped just outside the threshold because if I stepped in, security might physically remove me, and I refused to give him that scene. He pointed at the blinking lights. This is what happens when companies let fear become infrastructure. I said, if you pull that cable without shutting down services in sequence, you risk corrupting live transaction states. He looked over his shoulder. Listen to that. She even makes unplugging sound dramatic. Somebody laughed again. Not loud. Just enough. Richard wrapped his fingers around the cable. I looked at Sophia. She looked away. Richard, I said, and my voice sounded too calm even to me, do not dot his. He pulled. The hum died in sections. First the routing cluster. Then billing validation. Then customs sync. Then warehouse queue. The green light snapped off and rose until the rack became a black metal coffin. The silence was enormous. Richard held the cable up like a dead snake. Welcome to the future, he said. Then he took a selfie with the dark rack behind him and posted it in the company Slack channel. Cleaning house. The future starts now. People's phones buzzed all around me. I did not speak. I did not cry. I did not scream. When someone humiliates you in public, everyone expects you to either break down or explode. They do not know what to do when you become still. I turned and walked out. Javier caught up with me in the parking lot. What are you going to do? He asked. I unlocked my car. I am going home. That ice it? I looked back at the building my father built, the building where a man who had been family for 6 months had just erased 10 years of my work in 10 seconds. No, I said. That is not it. My apartment was small, quiet, and filled with the kind of equipment my father used to call paranoia. A backup power unit. Encrypted drives. Network maps. A locked cabinet of printed recovery keys. A cold mirror environment I had built 2 years earlier after a transformer failure almost wiped out 1 month of order history. Dad had laughed when I told him. You always prepare for disasters that never happen, he said. I had answered, that is why they do not happen. That Friday afternoon, disaster finally happened. I changed into sweatpants, tied my hair back, made coffee strong enough to qualify as a chemical weapon, and woke up the mirror. The monitors filled with logs. Skyroute 1 had accepted the migration but not the logic. That was the first thing I saw. It could store orders. It could route simple shipments. It could generate invoices. But it did not understand our exceptions. It was treating long-term contract customers like new accounts. It was capturing payments before customs validation. It was allowing duplicate billing tokens. It was assigning refrigerated trailers to dry freight lanes. It was sending status callbacks to an API endpoint we had retired 4 years earlier. In other words, it was not a system. It was a pretty box with our name on it. I opened a dashboard I had named Quiet Storm. It was not a weapon. I want that understood. I did not hack my father's company. I did not break into anything. I used old administrative audit permissions tied to infrastructure I had created and nobody had bothered to revoke because nobody remembered how much of the building still had my fingerprints in the walls. Quiet Storm showed me system failures, access logs, transaction errors, vendor calls, and executive-level configuration changes. It was designed for emergencies exactly like this one, although when I built it, I imagined fire, flood, ransomware, or human error. I had not imagined Richard. At 11:48 that night, while I was tracing a billing anomaly from a medical equipment client in Phoenix, a red alert appeared at the top of my screen. Encrypted outbound messages. Executive account, Richard Hale. Destination, private domain registrato Mark Ellison, CEO of Northstar Logistics, our most aggressive competitor. My first thought was that Skyroute 1 had misrouted a report. My second thought was worse. I clicked. The subject line made my hands go numb. Phase 2 is underway. I sat there in the bluish light of my monitors, coffee untouched, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I opened the message. Richard had not unplugged my server because he was arrogant. He had unplugged it because he was a traitor. I did not sleep that night. I read every message Richard sent like a coroner reading the last texts on a dead man's phone. Slowly. Carefully. Without emotion at first, because if I let myself feel everything, I would lose the precision I needed. There were 43 messages between Richard and Mark Ellison. Some were coded in executive nonsense, but the pattern was clear. Richard had chosen SkyRoute 1 because it was cheap, shallow, and easy to blame. He had accelerated the migration on purpose. He had locked me out because he knew I was the only person who could stop him. He had pushed Javier out because Javier knew the warehouse well enough to recognize staged chaos. The worst email was short. Mark, the old system is offline. By Black Friday, the failure should be visible enough to trigger lender concern and customer panic. Once valuation drops, Northstar can make the acquisition offer through the emergency channel. My VP role and 7-figure bonus remain as agreed. I read that line 5 times. My sister's husband was selling my father's life. Not just the company. The life. The 40 years of missed birthdays, early mornings, broken down trucks, payroll scares, Christmas bonuses Dad paid even when he had to delay his own salary. The warehouse where my mother once packed invoices by hand because we could not afford enough staff. The first office with stained carpet. The drivers who stayed because my dad knew their kids' names. The business that had fed all of us. Richard had walked into our family smiling and found the price tag. My first call was to Javier. He answered on the second ring, voice rough with sleep. Is he? Someone better be dead. Not yet. That woke him up. I told him enough. Not all of it. Just enough to make him quiet. When I finished, he said, I knew that man smelled like an elevator full of cologne and lawsuits. Can you watch the warehouse from outside? I got fired, not blinded. If you see anything strange near the docks, especially Northstar trucks or temporary carriers we do not use, take photos. Timestamps. License plates. Nothing dangerous. I know how to stand in a parking lot, kid. Javi. His voice softened. I am with you. The next morning, Saturday, I considered calling my father. I even pulled up his contact. Then I remembered the boardroom. Sunday dinner. The server room. His lowered eyes. His, give it a chance, sweetheart. I could already hear what he would say. Isabella, are you sure? Could this be a misunderstanding? Richard is ambitious, but he is family now. Do not let hurt feelings cloud your judgment. Hurt feelings. That phrase has been used to bury more women than dirt. So I waited. Not because I wanted the company to bleed. Because I needed proof so clean even my father could not look away from it. By Monday morning, the first customer complaints hit. A manufacturing client in Dallas was charged twice for the same shipment. A medical distributor in Phoenix had a refrigerated load assigned to a dry freight carrier. A small retailer in Denver had 112 orders stuck in pending validation. Customs documentation for a shipment headed through Laredo failed because SkyRoute 1 did not attach the revised tariff code. Richard sent a company-wide email before lunch. Team, we are experiencing minor inherited data issues due to legacy system inconsistencies. The modernization process remains on track. Inherited data issues. Legacy inconsistencies. He blamed me without typing my name. At 2:17, my father called. I stared at the phone for 3 rings before answering. Hi, Dad. His voice sounded strained. Are you at home? Yes. Richard says some of the old data tables were not properly normalized. I laughed once, sharp and ugly. What does that mean? He asked. It means Richard learned a phrase from the consultants and used it before lunch. Isabella. No. Ask him which table. Ask him which dependency failed. Ask him what validation rule he tested before shutting down billing. Ask him what a transaction state is. Silence. Then he said, I need you to be constructive. There it was. The family translation of be quiet. I was constructive 3 weeks ago when I told you this would happen. That is not fair. No, Dad. What happened Friday was not fair. This is just accurate. He exhaled. Richard thinks you are making this personal. Richard should be careful what he thinks. Do not threaten your brother-in-law. He is not my brother. I hung up before my voice broke. For 2 days, the company limped. I watched from my apartment as the error count climbed. I documented everything. Every duplicate charge. Every failed customs validation. Every unauthorized configuration change. Every time SkyRoute 1 tried to process an exception and fell on its face. On Tuesday night, Sophia showed up at my apartment. I saw her through the peephole, mascara smudged, hair tucked behind one ear, still wearing the pearl earrings Richard had given her after their honeymoon. I almost did not open the door. But she was my sister before she was his wife. What do you want? I asked. She held up a paper bag. I brought you dinner. I am not hungry. You never are when you are angry. That is not true. I ate half a bag of pretzels 20 minutes ago. She tried to smile. Failed. I let her in. She looked around my apartment at the monitors, cables, notebooks, maps, and blinking drives. Her eyes landed on the dashboard running across my main screen. Are you spying on the company? I am watching it drown. That is not an answer. It is the answer you get. She put the food on my kitchen counter. Richard says you are refusing to help because you want him to fail. I turned slowly. And you believe him? She looked down. That was answer enough. I nodded, because the body sometimes accepts a blow before the mind can. You should leave, I said. Izzy, no. You do not get to bring me Thai food and his accusations in the same paper bag. He is my husband. And I am your sister. Her eyes filled. You have always hated men who got close to Dad. I stared at her, stunned. That was Richard's sentence. I could hear his voice inside it. Is that what he told you? She wiped under one eye. He said you would never accept him because Dad finally had someone who could take the company national. Dad already took the company national. You know what I mean. No, Sophia, I do not. I know exactly what I built. I know exactly what he broke. And I know you would rather believe I am bitter than admit you married a man who enjoys humiliating your family. She slapped me. Not hard enough to injure. Hard enough to end something. We both froze. Her hand flew to her mouth. Izzy, get out. I am sorry. Get out. She left crying. I locked the door and leaned my forehead against it. That was the first time I cried. Not in the server room. Not after my father failed me. Not after Richard's emails. I cried because my sister had hit me with his words still in her mouth. Then my phone buzzed. Javier had sent 5 photos. A row of Northstar trucks parked half a mile from our Houston warehouse. No company has trucks waiting near a competitor's warehouse by accident. Especially not 4 days before Black Friday. By Wednesday, the damage was no longer minor. Accounting found unexplained refunds on delivered orders, dispatch lost visibility on 3 routes. A high-value client threatened to pause all shipments unless my father personally guaranteed stability. SkyRoute 1 support blamed integration complexity. Richard blamed legacy sabotage. That phrase appeared in another email to the executive team. Possible internal obstruction by former system owner. Former system owner. I was not just being erased. I was being framed. On Thursday morning, security logs showed Richard's executive account exporting configuration packages to a personal drive. That night, someone attempted to revoke the last remaining audit token feeding Quiet Storm. They failed. Not because I was smarter than everyone. Because 2 years earlier, after that transformer failure, I had created a deadman log archive nobody knew existed except me. It copied critical audit trails to an offline encrypted storage device every 6 hours. I called it boring. Richard would have called it paranoia. Paranoia was about to save my father's company. Black Friday arrived like a car crash in slow motion. At 6 a.m., order volume tripled. At 7:12, payment queues started backing up. At 8:03, SkyRoute 1 began approving shipments without carrier confirmation. At 8:41, a script tried to correct failed charges by issuing refunds. At 9:15, the script started refunding delivered orders. By 10 o'clock, Mendoza Freight was losing nearly $900,000 an hour. My phone lit up with calls I did not answer. My father. My mother. The CFO. A number from the warehouse. Another from the board chair. Sophia. Sophia again. Sophia again. Then Richard posted in Slack. We are under a sophisticated cyber attack. All employees must preserve records. Do not communicate with unauthorized former system personnel. Unauthorized former system personnel. He meant me. At 10:22, my father left a voicemail. Isabella, please call me. Whatever is going on, we need you. I listened to it once. Then I kept working. By noon, Richard had convinced the executive team to contact our cyber insurance provider and outside counsel. That was smart. It made the lie look official. It also created a paper trail. At 2:30, a board emergency call was scheduled for 7 o'clock the next morning. I spent the night preparing a presentation unlike any Richard had ever made. No clouds. No slogans. No smiling stock photos. Just evidence. Logs. Emails. Timestamps. Refund traces. Vendor records, access changes. License plates from Javier's photos. A side-by-side comparison of what my system did versus what SkyRoute 1 failed to do. A timeline showing Richard's messages to Mark Ellison matched exactly with his internal decisions. At 6:52 Saturday morning, I joined the board call with my camera off. My father looked 10 years older. His shirt collar was open. My mother sat behind him on the sofa, rosary beads twisted between her fingers though she did not say a word. The CFO looked sick. 2 board members looked angry. Sophia sat alone in a different room, pale, her eyes swollen. Richard was in my father's office, sweating through a white shirt, pretending to be in control. The attack appears sophisticated, he was saying. We believe legacy access credentials may have been exploited. One board member asked, "Are you suggesting Isabella did this?" Richard lowered his with fake reluctance. "I am saying we cannot ignore timing. She had motive, knowledge, and emotional instability after being removed from the migration process." Emotional instability. That was when I turned on my camera. Nobody spoke. I had not dressed for them. My hair was in a knot. My hoodie was the same gray one from Friday. I probably looked exhausted, because I was. But my voice came out clean. "It is not a cyberattack," I said. And nothing was erased. Richard is lying because he does not know where the records live. Richard stood up so fast his chair rolled back. "She should not be on this call." My father whispered, "Isabella." "No," I said. "You all listened to him. Now you are going to listen to me." Richard pointed at the screen. "This is unauthorized access. This is disaster recovery oversight using infrastructure IBWILT while you were still Googling what customs validation means." The CFO covered his mouth. Issued my screen. First, I showed the operational failure timeline. Not opinions. Not insults. Just system behavior. Orders processed out of sequence. Payments captured before validation. Refunds triggered by a misconfigured recovery script. Carrier assignments missing required confirmations. Customs documents rejected because exception logic had not been migrated. Then I showed the emails. Phase 2 ICE underway. Valuation drop. Emergency acquisition channel. VP role. 7-figure bonus. The silence changed shape. At first, it was shock. Then it became horror. My father stood slowly, one hand on the desk. "Richard," he said, voice breaking, "tell me this is fake." Richard's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Arturo, she is manipulating partial records." I clicked to the next slide. Full headers. Routing metadata. DKIM signatures. Mail server authentication. Export logs from Richard's account. "I knew you would say that," I said. So it preserved the full message chain. He looked at Sophia. "Do not believe this." Sophia stared at him like she was seeing his face through water. Then she said, "Who is Lauren?" Richard went still. Everyone looked at her. Sophia lifted her phone with a shaking hand. "I found another phone in his gym bag last night. He said it was for investors. There are messages from a woman named Lauren talking about the Northstar bonus and an apartment in Chicago." That was the first public twist. Richard had not just betrayed the company. He had built a second life waiting for the money. Sophia's voice cracked. "You told her you only had to survive Thanksgiving with my family. You told her my father was easy because he wanted a son." My father flinched like she had slapped him. Richard said, "Sophia, baby, this is not the time." "Do not come baby," she said. I almost closed my eyes. Not from pity for him. From grief for her. My sister had defended that man until he used her love as a hallway to rob our house. But I was not finished. I clicked again and added Mark Ellison, CEO of Northstar Logistics, to the call. I had sent him an invitation 10 minutes earlier under the subject emergency acquisition discussion, knowing greed answers faster than guilt. His face appeared on screen, annoyed and half awake. "Richard, what the hell is this?" he said. Then saw the board. My father. The emails on screen. Javier's photos of Northstar trucks near our docks. His face lost all color. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," I said. "Is your offer to buy our company after your partner's staged operational failure still active, or should we route that question through our attorneys?" He did not answer. He did not need to. The board chair said, very quietly, "Record this meeting." Richard lunged toward his laptop, and his camera went sideways. For 2 seconds, all we saw was the ceiling fan in my father's office and his panicked hand reaching for the screen. Then my father's voice thundered, "Get away from my desk." It was the first time in months he sounded like himself. Richard came back into frame, red-faced, breathing hard. "You are all making a mistake," he said. "Without me, this company is dead by Monday." I looked at me father through the screen. "No," I said. "Without me, it would be." My father sat down. For the first time in my life, he did not look like the owner of anything. He looked like a man standing in the ashes of his own pride. "Can you fix it?" he asked. I held his gaze. "Yes." My mother began talkery behind him. "But not the way you think," I said. "I am done saving this company quietly while louder men get trusted for breaking it." Nobody interrupted me. "My conditions are simple. Richard is removed from all company systems and property today. Javier Ramirez is reinstated with a raise and back pay. Skyroute 1 is frozen pending investigation. I take full authority over technology, security, and disaster recovery, with a voting seat on the executive committee. Every major technical decision requires my sign-off. And nobody in this family ever calls me animateur again because I understand what you refuse to learn. My father bowed his head. I accept. Richard laughed, wild and desperate. You cannot be serious. Arturo, she is emotional. She is not executive material. My father looked at him. You unplugged my daughter's work in front of my employees. Richard swallowed. You sold my company to my competitor. No one moved. And you made me doubt my own child. That was the first time Richard looked afraid. Not angry. Not cornered. Afraid. Then my apartment doorbell rang. I checked the camera and saw two men in suits standing in the hallway. Behind them was an uniformed officer. For half a second, I thought Richard had made one more move against me. Then one of the men held up his badge to the camera. Federal Economic Crimes Task Force. My stomach dropped. On the screen, Richard was still shouting, "This is illegal. She hacked us. She planted all of it." The doorbell rang again. I looked back at the board call, at my father's stunned face, at Sophia holding her phone like it might cut her, at Richard sweating in the office he had tried to inherit. And I realized the day was not ending with him saving the company. It was ending with someone in handcuffs. I opened the door. The federal agents were polite in the way men are polite when they already know more than they are saying. "Ms. Mendoza," the older one asked. "Yes. I am Special Agent Harris, this is Special Agent Cole. We received an emergency referral from your company's outside counsel regarding suspected corporate sabotage and interstate commercial fraud. We understand you may have preserved relevant system records." I stepped aside and let them in. My father was still on the video call behind me. Richard saw the agents enter my apartment and went pale in a way that had nothing to do with cameras or lighting. Agent Harris looked at my screens, then at the board call, then at me. "Are we interrupting?" "No," I said. "You are right on time." Richard exploded. "Do not give them anything. This is privileged company property. Arturo, tell her." My father did not answer him. Agent Harris leaned toward my microphone. "Mr. Hale, please do not delete, alter, or destroy any digital or physical records related to this matter. Local officers are being dispatched to Mendoza Freight's Houston office to secure devices." Richard backed away from the laptop. Sophia whispered, "Oh my God." That was the second twist in the second half, the one Richard never expected. While he had been building a fake cyber attack narrative, our CFO had panicked and called outside counsel. Outside counsel, unlike my family, understood what my logs meant. They had already escalated before Richard knew the story had slipped out of his hands. But the biggest twist was still waiting in the warehouse. Agent Harris asked me to walk him through the evidence. I did, slowly. Every log. Every email. Every timestamp. Every system decision. I showed how Richard had changed permissions to lock me out 4 hours before the public shutdown. I showed how he exported configuration data to a private drive. I showed how his messages to Mark Ellison matched Javier's photos of Northstar trucks staged near the West Access Road. Then Javier called. I put him on speaker. "Izzy," he said, breathing hard, "you need to see this." "What happened?" "Northstar drivers just tried to enter Dock 4 with pickup authorizations." I felt every person on the video call freeze. "What authorizations?" "Printed ones. Mendoza letterhead. Signed by Richard." Richard shouted, "That is impossible." Javier's voice turned cold. "Want me to read your signature line, boss?" Agent Cole stepped closer. "Mr. Ramirez, are the drivers still there?" "Yes, sir, security has them at the gate. I told them to block entry. Do not let anyone leave if it can be done safely. Officers are on the way." Javier said, "Been waiting 17 years to hear somebody official say that." That was the third twist. Richard had not planned to wait for a clean acquisition. He had arranged for Northstar to scoop key routes and customer freight during the chaos, creating an emergency so severe my father would be forced to accept a rescue offer by Monday. He was not just selling the house. He was trying to carry furniture out while it burned. My father gripped the edge of his desk. "Richard," he said, "what did you do?" Richard looked around the room like there might be a door only guilty men could see. Then he ran. For 8 ridiculous seconds, we watched my father's office camera shake as Richard shoved past someone off screen. The board call erupted. Sophia screamed his name, then stopped herself as if even that gave him too much. My father disappeared from his chair. We heard shouting in the hallway. A crash. Someone yelling for security. Then silence. Agent Harris looked at me. "Do you have remote access to disable Mr. Hale's executive credentials?" "Yes." "Do it." My hands moved before my emotions caught up. I revoked his email. His VPN. His administrative profile. His building badge integration. His SkyRoute 1 token, his dashboard rights. His procurement authorization. Every digital door he had used to enter our life slammed shut one by one. On my screen, the access list turned gray beside his name. Richard Hale, disabled. I had imagined revenge before. I would be lying if I said I had not. In my angriest moments, revenge looked dramatic. Public speeches. People begging. Richard exposed under bright lights. My father apologizing in front of everyone who had laughed. But the most satisfying moment was quiet. One line of text. Disabled. At 10:16 a.m., local police detained Richard in the parking garage. He had tried to leave through the lower level with his laptop bag and my father's emergency company credit card. Security stopped him because Javier had called the front desk and told them, if the tall cologne bottle in the suit tries to leave, tackle him with paperwork. They did not tackle him, but they did block the exit long enough for officers to arrive. By noon, I was back at Mendoza Freight. Walking into that building after everything felt like walking into the scene of a crime where the victim was still breathing. Nobody laughed this time, people stepped aside as I crossed the lobby. Some looked ashamed. Some looked scared. A few looked relieved. The same interns who had watched Richard unplug the server were standing near the vending machines, wide-eyed. One of them whispered, "Ms. Mendoza, we are sorry." I stopped. They both froze. "You did not unplug it," I said. The taller one swallowed. We laughed. I looked at them for a long moment. Then remember how cheap laughter feels when you borrow it from a bully. They nodded like I had handed them a sentence to carry for years. The server room was a mess. Richard had not just unplugged the main rack. In the panic of the failed migration, consultants had pulled secondary cables, moved hardware, mislabeled switches, and stacked drives on a metal cart like bones after surgery. Someone had left a coffee cup on a network diagram. That offended me more than it should have. Javier arrived 10 minutes later in his old work boots, carrying his cardboard box. I looked at it. "You brought the bulldog?" He pulled out the little ceramic dog and placed it on top of the rack. Every war room needs morale. I almost smiled. "Welcome back, Warehouse Operations Director." He raised an eyebrow. "Director?" "With a raise." "How much?" "Enough to make Richard angry wherever he is." "Good. We get to work." The next 14 hours were brutal. I did not magically flip a switch and save everything, that is not how real systems work. We restored carefully, checking transaction states, freezing dangerous scripts, rebuilding routing queues, reconciling payments, and isolating SkyRoute 1 from anything that could cause more damage. I pulled the mirror environment into controlled recovery. Javier coordinated dock holds and manual releases. Accounting reconciled refunds. The CFO, pale but useful, got on calls with the banks. My father stayed out of the server room unless I asked for him. That was new. At 4:37 p.m., the first restored validation batch completed. A green light came on, then another. Then another. The room began to hum. I stood in front of the rack and listened. It was not beautiful to anyone else. To me, it sounded like a lung filling with air after nearly drowning. Javier crossed himself, then pretended he had only scratched his chest. By 6 p.m., urgent medical shipments were cleared. By 8:30, duplicate billing was contained. By midnight, 73% of frozen orders were back in proper status. By Sunday evening, we were damaged but alive. Richard spent the weekend in a holding room, then under investigation, then very quickly abandoned by every person who had loved the shiny brought into a room. Mark Ellison resigned from Northstar within 72 hours pending his own investigation. Northstar issued a public statement so full of concern, cooperation, and internal review that it might as well have been written by fear itself. Sophia did not come to the office. I did not call her. Not because I did not love her. Because love does not mean rushing to comfort someone who helped hold the match while your work burned. The following Tuesday, my father asked me to meet him in the conference room. I almost said no. The only reason I went was because the company still needed decisions, and I had promised myself I would never let personal pain make me careless with other people's livelihoods. Hugh was already there when I arrived, alone, no jacket, no expensive pen in his hand, no Richard beside him translating arrogance into strategy. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had finally stopped looking at him from below. "Close the door," he asked. I left it open. He noticed. His face tightened, but he nodded. "Fair enough." I sat across from him. For a while, neither of us spoke. On the wall behind him hung a framed photo from the company's 25th anniversary. Dad in the center, smiling, arm around Sophia, one hand on my shoulder. I was 24 in that picture, wearing a black dress my mother begged me to buy, looking uncomfortable but proud. Richard was nowhere in it. That helped. My father said, "I do not know how to ask for forgiveness. Start by not asking me to make you feel better." He closed his eyes. I had never spoken to him like that before. Not because he did not deserve it earlier. Because daughters of strong fathers learn to measure every sentence for damage before saying it. He opened his eyes again. I failed you. Yes. The word landed between us with no cushion. I let a man with nice words convince me my daughter did not understand her own work. Yes. I was embarrassed by what I did not understand, so I listened to the person who made me feel smart. That one surprised me. I folded my hands on the table. You did not need to understand every line of code, I said. I never asked you to. I needed you to trust me when I told you something could break. He looked down. When you were little, he said, you used to take apart radios. Your mother was terrified you would electrocute yourself. I remember. I would tell her, leave the girl alone, she wants to know how things work. I said nothing. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that was a gift. No, I said quietly. You liked it when it was cute. You stopped liking it when it made men uncomfortable. He looked up at me. There are sentences that change a room. That one did. He did not defend himself, that was the closest thing to progress I had seen all year. You are right, he said. I wanted those words for so long. Years, maybe. I had imagined them healing me instantly. Instead, they made me tired. Relief is heavy when it arrives late. He slid a folder across the table. I did not touch it. What is that? Your new employment agreement. Chief Technology and Security Officer. Executive Committee voting seat. Full authority over technical infrastructure. Compensation adjusted to market, plus retention equity. I stared at the folder. Is this an apology with numbers? No, he said. It is a correction with numbers. That was a better answer than I expected. Still, I said, I do not want a title because you feel guilty. You are not getting it because I feel guilty. You are getting it because this company almost died without it. I opened the folder, the number on the second page made me blink, but I kept my face still. My father almost smiled. You can look pleased. It will not weaken your argument. I am not done being mad. I know. I may be mad for a long time. I know that too. I signed 3 pages and pushed the folder back. Technology belongs to the company, I said. But technical decisions belong to qualified technical leadership. That means me. If the board wants to override me, it has to be documented, justified, and voted. Yes. Javier gets his raise in writing. Already done. Skyroute 1 is terminated pending damages review. Yes. Richard's name comes off every internal document by Friday. My father hesitated. Some legal records, you know what I mean. Yes. And one more thing. He waited. I looked at the open door. The next time someone humiliates an employee in this building, the person laughing leaves with them. My father swallowed. Agreed. I stood. He said, Isabella. I stopped but did not turn. I am proud of you. For a second, I was 12 again, holding a broken radio, waiting for him to say I had done something good. Then I remembered the server room. I know, I said. But I needed you to be proud before everyone else was forced to be. I walked out before he could answer. Sophia came to my apartment that Friday night. This time, she did not bring dinner like a peace offering from a person who wanted forgiveness without consequences. She brought a cardboard box. Inside were Richard's remaining things from her house, cufflinks, a monogrammed wallet, a framed wedding photo turned face down, a tie clip shaped like a silver bar, and the burner phone wrapped in a dish towel. I gave copies to the agents, she said. They said I could keep the physical phone until they collect it officially Monday. You should not have brought it here. I know. She looked wrecked. Not movie wrecked. Real wrecked. Skin dull. Eyes swollen. Hair unwashed. No jewelry except her wedding ring, which hung from a chain around her neck instead of her finger. I did not know where else to go. I stood in the doorway. I am not your emergency exit. Her mouth trembled. I deserve that. Yes. I also deserve worse. I stepped aside. She came in slowly, like the apartment might reject her. For a while, we sat on opposite ends of my couch. She stared at the burner phone on the coffee table like it was a snake. He told Lauren I was useful, she said. That is the word he used. Useful. He said marrying me gave him family access and softened Dad. I looked at her. I am sorry. She laughed once through her nose, miserable. You are sorry? I slapped you. Yes. You did. I believed him over you. Yes. I watched him humiliate you. Yes. She covered her face. Why are you not yelling? Because if I start, I may not stop. Her shoulders shook. Not because she had earned comfort. Because I was tired of Richard deciding what kind of sisters we were allowed to be. After a few minutes, she whispered, Do you hate me? No, she looked up. But I do not trust you right now, I said. And I am not going to pretend I do just because you are hurting. She nodded, tears sliding down her face. I do not trust myself either. That was the saddest thing she had said. I moved closer, not enough to hug her, but enough that the space between us stopped feeling like a wall. Richard did not make you stupid, I said. He made you loyal to a lie. There is a difference. I should have seen it. Maybe. Maybe not. People like him are good at finding the part of you that wants to be chosen. She looked at me. What part did he find in Dad? I thought about that for a long time. The part that wanted a son who spoke the language of rich men. Sophia closed her eyes. And in you? She asked. I leaned back against the couch. The part that still wanted this family to notice I was holding the roof up. She reached for my hand, then stopped before touching me. I noticed. That was a beginning. The investigations went public 2 weeks later. Not because we wanted publicity. Because there is no quiet way to explain why your executive son-in-law has been removed. Your competitors' trucks were photographed near your docks during a system collapse, and federal investigators have collected laptops from 2 companies. The internet did what the internet does. Richard became the Black Friday brother-in-law. Someone made a meme of a man unplugging a toaster labeled Family Legacy. Someone else edited his old LinkedIn headshot onto a raccoon carrying a server cable. Employees pretended not to enjoy it too much. Reporters called me a whistleblower, a genius, a cybersecurity mastermind, a hacker daughter, a quiet hero. None of those labels felt right. I was not a genius. I was prepared. I was not a hacker. I had keys to doors I built. I was not quiet. People had simply mistaken not being heard for not speaking. My father wanted me to do an interview. I refused. Then the board wanted me to sit for a profile in a business magazine. I refused that too. Why not? Sophia asked one night. She had started coming over on Wednesdays. We did not talk about forgiveness. We talked about groceries, lawyers, sleep, and sometimes nothing because the story they want is too simple. What story is that? Misunderstood daughter saves company from evil brother-in-law. That is kind of what happened. No, I said. A whole company ignored the woman who understood the risk because a man in a suit made ignorance feel modern. Richard was the match. He was not the dry wood. Sophia was quiet. Then she said, that should be the interview. I looked at her. For the first time in months, she almost smiled. A month after the shutdown, Mendoza Freight held its first formal executive committee meeting under the new structure. I wore a black blazer over a plain white shirt because my mother said, please, just once, no hoodie, and I decided not every battle needed blood. Javier came as warehouse operations director and looked so uncomfortable in a button-down shirt that I told him he could roll up his sleeves before he passed out. The board chair opened the meeting by acknowledging recent events. I interrupted him. With respect, say what happened. He blinked. My father looked at me, then at him. The board chair cleared his throat. The company was targeted through internal sabotage, executive misconduct, and attempted collusion with a competitor. Thank you, I said. Javier hid a smile behind his coffee, then we got to work. Real work. Not performance. We reviewed new backup protocols, vendor approval procedures, access controls, emergency incident plans, and a rule I had printed and taped to the server room door in large black letters. Nobody disconnects what they do not understand. My father saw it before the meeting and stared at it for a long time. Too much? I asked. No, he said. Not enough. He ordered a metal sign. At the end of the meeting, my father placed a small plaque on the table in front of me. Isabella Mendoza, Chief Technology and Security Officer. I looked at it without touching it. Sadie did not want symbols instead of change. It is not instead, he said. It is after. Everyone was watching. That would have embarrassed me once. Now I let them watch. I picked up the plaque. It was heavier than it looked. Thank you, I said. My father's eyes were wet, but he did not make the moment about his tears. That was growth too. After the meeting, I went down to the server room alone. The hum filled the cold space. Green lights blinked in patient rows. The ceramic bulldog sat on top of the rack like a ridiculous little guardian. The metal sign had already been installed on the door. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, exactly where I had sat so many nights when no one knew I was there. Victory tasted strange. People think being proven right feels sweet. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it tastes like coffee left too long on a burner. Bitter. Necessary. Hot enough to remind you that you should not have had to drink it. I had exposed Richard. I had saved my father's company. I had gotten the title, the authority, the salary, the seat, the apology. I had watched the man who called me an amateur lose every door he thought would open for him. And still, part of me grieved. Because to be believed, I first had to be publicly humiliated. Because to be trusted, I had to let the company nearly collapse. Because to be seen, the lights had to go out. I closed my eyes and listened to the servers breathe. My phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. Family dinner Sunday. Dad wants you to explain the new system. Mom is making pot roast. Javier is invited. I told everyone noon is allowed to interrupt you. A second message came in. Also, I am sorry. I know I have said it before. I will keep saying it while I prove it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed, I will come. No pot roast jokes. She replied with a crying laughing emoji, then, no promises from Javier. Sunday dinner felt like walking into a room from my childhood after someone had moved all the furniture 2 inches to the left. Everything looked familiar. Nothing felt the same. My mother hugged me too long at the door. She whispered, I should have spoken up that day. Yes, I said. She held me tighter. I will next time. That mattered more than a perfect apology. Javier arrived with a bakery pie and wore his work boots because he said formal shoes were how bad decisions started. Sophia set the table. My father carried coffee cups in and out like a nervous waiter in his own house. There was no Richard-shaped hole in the room. That surprised me. I had expected his absence to feel dramatic, like a missing tooth. Instead, it felt like someone had finally turned off a loud machine. After dinner, my father asked, would you explain the recovery system? Before, someone would have checked their phone. Someone would have changed the subject. Richard would have made a joke and everyone would have gratefully followed it. This time, they listened. I explained the mirror environment, audit trails, validation layers, disaster recovery windows, and why cheap migration without business logic is not modernization but gambling with prettier paperwork. My mother asked what an audit token was. Sophia took notes. Javier interrupted only once to say, tell them about the refrigerated trailers, because that part made Muent to bite someone. Even my father took notes. At one point, he stopped me and said, so if we had followed your original 90-day plan, we would have found the failures in testing. He nodded slowly. And Richard knew that? Yes. The room went quiet. Then my father said, ask Isabella first from now on. She knows. Such a simple sentence. Not a speech. Not a plaque. Not a legal title. She knows. I looked down at my coffee because I did not want them to see what that did to me. Trust does not come back all at once. It is not a server you plug in and watch blink green. It returns slowly, if it returns at all, carried by repeated proof and changed behavior. Some days I forgave my father for an hour. Some days I took it back. Some days Sophia and I laughed like sisters again, and then I remembered her hand across my face and needed distance. Healing is not a clean migration either. But months later, when our biggest customer renewed early because they trusted the new safeguards, my father forwarded me the email with only 2 words, you did this. I printed it. Not for the praise, for the record. Richard eventually took a plea deal on some charges and kept fighting others. Men like him rarely disappear quietly. They rebrand, appeal, deny, explain, blame stress, blame ambition, blame misunderstandings, blame everyone but the mirror. I stopped following every update. The lawyers told me what I needed to know. Sophia stopped wearing her ring on the chain. One Wednesday, she came over without it at all. I threw it into Buffalo Bayou, she said. That is littering. I know. Good. We laughed for so long we both cried. Mendoza Freight did not become perfect. No company does. We lost money. We lost clients. We lost the illusion that family automatically means loyalty. But we kept the work. We kept the people who mattered. We rebuilt the parts that were weak before Richard found them. That may be the hardest truth. Betrayal does not create every crack. Sometimes it only finds the cracks everybody else agreed not to see. A year after the shutdown, I stood in the same hallway outside the server room where Richard had held up that cable and smiled. The interns were no longer interns. One had joined IT operations. The other worked in dispatch and asked better questions than half the executives. Javier's ceramic bulldog had been joined by a tiny plastic armadillo from a driver in San Antonio. My metal sign was still on the door. Nobody disconnects what they do not understand. My father came down the hall carrying 2 coffees. He handed me one. Board approved the new backup facility, he said. Because I gave them no choice. He smiled, because you were right. I like my version better. I know. We stood there listening to the hum behind the door. After a while, he said, when Richard unplugged that server, I thought he was turning off a machine. I looked at him. I did not understand he was trying to turn off you. For a moment, I could not speak. Then I said, he tried. My father nodded. He failed. Through the small window in the door, the green lights blinked steady and alive. Richard had unplugged my server to humiliate me. He thought the room would go dark and everyone would finally see me as the problem. What he did not understand was that every strong system has a backup. And so do some women.